Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Sarastro's Star Wars painting series. In this episode, we're going to paint the Royal Guard from Fantasy Flight's Imperial Assault. The figures we've covered so far have been fairly monochrome. The Royal Guards, however, give us a fresh challenge. We want to create a deep, vibrant red with smooth shadows and highlights. Here's how we're going to do it. We'll begin by priming the figures in white, before painting on the base colours. We'll follow this with a black wash for the staff and a crimson shade for the clothes to darken the shadows. We'll then highlight the miniature using several thin layers. Finally, we'll finish the miniature off with an optional red glaze to tie the layers together and some gloss varnish for the helmet. As we're preparing the figures in the same way we prepared the stormtroopers in episode 1, we can jump straight in with step 2. The order in which we paint the base colours isn't really important. I've chosen to paint the staff first, beginning with the blade, which I'm going to paint with a bright silver. Looking at source images from the movies, we can see there are also some metallic bands at the bottom end of the staff. We don't need to be too intricate here, but I think at least one band of silver is needed to add a simple decorative accent to the figure. For the rest of the staff, we're going to mix a dark grey, using a 50-50 mix of black and Mechanicus grey, which we will later shade with a black wash. Now we paint the robe using a strong red. I'm using Citadel's Mephiston red, which has a deep, vibrant tone. We want to be as accurate as we can at this stage, as mistakes will be harder to correct later once we've shaded the figure. A couple of layers may be necessary to give us the strong, even coverage we're after. Finally, we paint the eye slit with a plain black. Once we're happy we have neat, flat base colours, we're ready for the wash. A simple undiluted black wash for the staff will do a nice job of dulling the blade slightly and shading the staff, turning our dark grey into a subtle off black. Just don't forget to give the bottle a very good shake before applying. It's worth letting the black wash dry before adding the crimson wash to avoid the two running into one another. Now I'm going to use some Carroburg crimson to shade the gloves, helmet and robe. We may need to use our judgment and soak up the shade if it's collecting too heavily anywhere we might not want. Once we've finished shading the miniature with the wash, it may need a good half hour or more to dry completely before we begin adding the highlights. For the staff, a careful bit of silver along the length of the blade and a little on the handle and the tip is all we need to boost the contrast. The real work begins when we highlight the clothes. Rather than use Mephiston red, which has a high pigmentation, I'm going to use Evil Sunz Scarlet, which is from Citadel's layer range, which means it is less opaque and will therefore allow some of the darker tone beneath to show through. This lets us create smoother transitions as we layer up to the lighter areas. I would still add a little water to thin the paint before we begin painting all of the red areas except for those darker parts of the model that we want to remain dark, which means we avoid all of the shadowed creases and folds. One of the advantages of using thin layers is that to increase the brightness of a highlight, all we have to do is add an additional layer. We don't have to mix a lighter shade of the colour we're using, because it's the simple accumulation of layers that strengthens the brighter tone. Usually this means we would add successively smaller areas of highlight to create the illusion of a seamless gradation from dark to light. If we're ever unsure exactly where to place our highlights, we can simply look at where the light naturally falls on the miniature, and assuming our light source is mostly coming from above, the light itself should give us a pretty good idea as to which parts of the figure should receive the brightest highlights. These will include the top of the shoulders and helmet, and the upturned lower parts of the robe. We should also ensure that the face and eye area are well lit, as this will help establish the face as the focal point of the figure. Once we've maxed out the brightest highlights with the Evil Sunz Scarlet, we could add a very small final highlight with a lighter tone to add that extra bit of contrast. We don't do this by simply adding white, however, as we would end up with a pink Royal Guard. Instead, we could add a little yellow to lighten the scarlet, or, as I'm doing, use a lighter shade of red such as Citadel's Wild Rider Red. This should be thinned as usual and then applied sparingly only to the areas that we want to receive a final extra highlight to help make the figure pop. With the final highlights done, we're ready to add some finishing touches. The next thing we can do is add a red glaze to the miniature, and I'm using Citadel's Bloodletter. The purpose of the glaze is to provide a final semi-translucent layer of vibrant red that will help to tone down any overbright highlights and give a smoother overall look to the transitions. We apply the glaze undiluted to all of the red areas a bit like a wash, except we don't want it to collect too heavily in the recesses. As the effect of the glaze is quite subtle, it may be a step you choose to skip if you're on a budget and want to limit the number of new paints you need to buy. Once the glaze is completely dry, we can go ahead and paint the base before spraying with a matte varnish. Our final touch will be to give the helmet a coat of gloss varnish, which gives it a beautiful hardened finish, which contrasts nicely with the softer matte finish of the robe. This completes the Royal Guard. Thank you once again for watching and supporting this series. Stay tuned for more as we tackle the remaining Imperial units over the coming weeks. Happy painting!